Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey into the frozen heart of Yellowstone National Park, a place of endless wilderness, forgotten corners, and isolated ranger posts where help does not reach. Within this vast expanse lie 10 true stories, each pulled from real encounters that park rangers wish they could forget. What you are about to hear is disturbing, unexplainable, and rooted in experiences no training could prepare them for. These are not legends or campfire tales. These are documented encounters from ordinary rangers who face something they were never meant to see. From abandoned outposts to creatures that should not exist. From disappearances that defy explanation to basements hiding secrets older than the park itself. Tonight, you will hear horrors that claw at the edges of reality. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Yellowstone National Park, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Evan McConnell, and I've been a Yellowstone Ranger for nearly 11 years. I've seen tourists get lost, bison flip cars, and hikers wander straight into wolf territory because they wanted a cool picture. But nothing, not even the worst rescues, prepared me for what happened during my 11 years night patrol around the lower Geyser Basin 3 summers ago. I took that shift because I liked the quiet. The sulfur steam, the distant roars of erupting geysers, the hiss of boiling mud. It all felt oddly comforting. That night, though, everything was wrong. The basin felt awake, like the ground itself was holding its breath. My partner, Maria, kept joking that we were walking on top of hell. I laughed, but the unease in her voice didn't match the humor in her words. She kept glancing at the fog drifting across the boardwalk, insisting she saw movement inside it. Shapes, flickers, something tall. At around 2:17 a.m., we heard the first sound. A deep, bubbling groan that didn't match any geothermal activity we knew. It was too rhythmic, too alive. The steam in front of us pulsed, expanding outward like something massive was pushing through it. Maria whispered, "Evan, something's coming up." And for the first time in my career, I believed her. We froze as the steam rolled across the boardwalk in thick, suffocating waves. Yellowstone steam is usually warm, painfully warm at times, but this was cold, bitterly cold. I could see Maria's breath fogging the air even though it was almost 70 degrees that night. The groaning sound grew louder, rising from beneath the earth like something was forcing its way upward. The ground trembled under my boots, not like an earthquake, but like footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Maria gripped my sleeve. "Back up," she whispered. I should have listened. But protocol demanded we identify any potential hazards in visitor zones. So, like an idiot, I stepped closer. The steam parted for a moment, just enough that my flashlight beam cut through it. And I saw skin, pale, wet, stretched tight like it had been boiled, a shoulder, then part of a face, eyes that were too large, too sunken, reflecting the light like an animal's. And then it vanished back into the steam, not retreated, collapsed into it like its body dissolved back into vapor. Maria hissed, "We need to call this in." I opened the radio, but static flooded the channel, loud, violent, like thousands of voices whispering over each other. The geysers around us began erupting in random, staggered bursts, as if the entire basin was reacting to whatever had surfaced. The footsteps started again. This time, much closer. The footsteps stopped just beyond the wall of steam, heavy enough that the boardwalk faintly trembled beneath them. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. but the beam only lit swirling fog, no body, no outline, nothing solid to aim at. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself. It felt intentional, like whatever was out there was listening to us now. Maria's voice cracked. "Evan, we have to move. This isn't geothermal. This isn't..." Before she could finish, something exhaled. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was like air moving out of a cavern, deep, hollow, wet. The steam blasted forward, hitting us with that unnatural cold again. My skin prickled instantly, like frostbite forming in seconds. Maria stumbled backward, her boot catching the edge of the boardwalk, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her upright. Then the shape appeared again. This time, it wasn't dissolving. It was forming. Limbs took shape as the vapor condensed, long and thin, bending at angles that made my stomach twist. The head surfaced last, smooth, eyeless at first, until two black hollows slowly opened like melting wax, revealing sockets. The thing stepped toward us, and the wooden planks groaned beneath its weight. I took one step back. It took one step forward, then another. It was following us. We retreated down the boardwalk, moving slowly, terrified that running would trigger something worse. The creature moved with the steam, never fully solid, its limbs shifting like they were struggling to decide what shape they should take. Every few seconds, a geyser erupted somewhere nearby, each blast lighting the fog in flashes of blue-white. And every flash revealed the thing closer than before. Maria whispered, "It's using the steam. It's wearing it." Her words didn't feel metaphorical. They felt literal. The radio crackled again, but instead of static, a single whisper bled through. "Stay." Maria slapped her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. I grabbed her wrist and pulled her faster. We reached a split in the boardwalk, left toward the main trail, right toward the old maintenance shed. The left path led to safety, but was completely swallowed in fog. The right path was clearer, but it led deeper into the basin. The creature stepped behind us, and the boards shook violently. We had seconds. "We go right," I decided. Maria protested, but I was already dragging her. Better a known danger than disappearing into a fog where the creature could be anywhere, above, behind, inside the steam itself. As we moved, the creature didn't follow immediately. It waited, like it knew we had nowhere safe to go. The path to the maintenance shed stretched ahead of us, twisting through vents of steam that rose in violent bursts. My flashlight flickered each time a geyser breathed out, as if the light itself didn't want to reveal whatever lurked behind us. Maria kept glancing over her shoulder, even though I'd told her not to. She whispered, "Evan, it's not walking anymore." I risked a look. She was right. The creature wasn't stepping along the boardwalk. It was gliding, moving with the steam, as if its feet weren't touching the wood at all. Its limbs dragged behind it like wet ropes, stretching and recoiling with each pulse of vapor. Every time a new cloud erupted from a vent, the creature's outline filled in more, becoming clearer, sharper, and hungrier. We reached the shed, an old sun-bleached structure used mostly for emergency equipment storage. I yanked the door open and pulled Maria inside. She slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt. The interior smelled of oil, metal, and damp wood, familiar, grounding smells. But they did nothing to calm the weight of fear pressing on both of us. The creature moved outside, its shadow spreading across the window like a stain. The steam swirled around it unnaturally, spiraling inward as though the thing were inhaling the fog itself. Maria backed away from the window, whispering, "It's trying to find a way in." I believed her. The shed creaked as the creature circled it, its movements accompanied by that horrifying cavernous breathing. The boards trembled under each pass, dust falling from the rafters like the place itself feared what lurked outside. Maria rummaged through a storage bin with shaking hands, searching for anything we could use defensively. Bear spray, flashlight flares, anything, she muttered. Please tell me someone stalked this place. I grabbed a flare gun from the wall rack. Loaded, thank God. But before I could feel even a moment of relief, the temperature in the room dropped so sharply that frost began to form on the metal shelves. The air turned visible, every breath coming out as a cloud. The creature was right outside the door. The knob twitched, once, twice, slow circles, as though a curious hand was testing how human locks worked. Maria squeezed her eyes shut. Evan, it's learning us. The knob stopped moving. Silence. Then a wet, dragging scrape traveled up the wall, across the roof, and down the opposite side. It was climbing the shed, surrounding it, like a spider mapping out prey. The steam outside darkened, swirling faster, becoming a vortex that pressed against the wooden structure until the boards groaned. I raised the flare gun at the door. If it comes in, run. Don't wait for me. Maria shook her head, terrified. We're not splitting up. But something outside decided for us. The window shattered inward. Glass exploded inward as the steam surged through the shattered window, filling the shed like floodwater. Maria screamed and ducked behind a metal cabinet while I fired the flare gun instinctively. The flare shot through the cloud, bursting in a violent red flash that briefly illuminated the creature's body as it forced itself inside. For the first time, I saw it without steam distorting it. It was worse. Its skin wasn't skin. It was a membrane, thin, slick, translucent, stretched over a too-long frame. Its ribs jutted outward like branches threatening to pierce through. Its face held those hollow eye sockets, but now I could see something moving inside them, swirling like black smoke trapped in glass. The creature recoiled from the flare's heat, screeching with a sound that made my teeth ache. Steam peeled away from its form, revealing more of its twisted body, but the moment the flare's light dimmed, the fog rushed back around it like loyal armor. Another! Maria shouted, tossing me a second flare. I fired again, aiming directly at its chest. The flare struck the creature, embedding in its membrane-like skin. It lit up from the inside, bones glowing through as if it were a lantern of horror. The creature fled backward, half melting into the steam, its body slithering through the broken window in retreat. But it wasn't gone. It only needed distance, because now it knew exactly what we were. Prey. The shed fell silent except for our ragged breathing. The steam outside thickened, circling the structure like a slow cyclone. I reloaded the flare gun with my last shot, while Maria secured the door with a metal pipe, even though we both knew it wouldn't stop that thing if it wanted in again. We need to get to the ranger station, she said. The thermal sensors, emergency beacon, something might scare it off. I nodded, but dread settled in my stomach. To reach the station, we'd have to cross open ground. Ground covered in geysers, steam vents, and fog. The creature's home territory. Still, staying here meant waiting to die. We slipped out through the shed's back exit. The fog was thicker than before, so dense our flashlights only lit a few feet ahead. The boardwalk creaked under our steps, each sound echoing like a beacon for whatever hunted us. Halfway down the path, everything stopped. The steam froze midair. Not literally, but it stopped moving. No rising, no drifting, no swirling, just suspended like time itself hesitated. Maria grabbed my arm. "Evan, where is it?" Then we heard it. Not footsteps, not breathing, whispering, repeating the same word over and over, coming from every direction at once. Stay, stay, stay. And the steam began to move again, toward us, not upward. Something was inside it, closing in. The steam surged toward us like a living tide, rolling low across the boardwalk, swallowing everything it touched. Maria grabbed my wrist, and we sprinted, our boots hammering against the wood. Every few seconds, I looked back. And every time, I saw movement in the fog. Not one shape, several. Tall, thin silhouettes sliding through the steam in perfect sync, as if the creature we encountered wasn't alone, or wasn't a single being at all. Maybe it was part of something larger, a network, a hive. A presence spread across the geothermal basin. We ran past a vent that suddenly erupted, blasting boiling water into the air. A shape rose in the steam of the eruption, too fast, too impossible to be human. It collapsed back into the fog before my mind could process it. Maria pointed at a distant light, the ranger station window. "We're almost there," she yelled. But the boardwalk trembled violently. Something heavy slammed against it from beneath, cracking the planks. Maria stumbled but kept running, tears streaking down her face. I heard the whisper again, now directly beside my ear. "Stay." I jerked left in panic, nearly falling off the boardwalk into a boiling pool. A hand, cold, wet, impossibly thin, closed around my shoulder through the fog. Maria screamed my name. I fired the last flare blindly. Red light filled the fog, and the hand withdrew, shrieking. The flare's red glow gave us only seconds. The silhouettes recoiled, writhing like shadows cast by something trying to hold a shape. Maria grabbed my arm, and we sprinted the final stretch. The station door was locked. Of course it was. But adrenaline turned me into a battering ram. I slammed my shoulder into it until the hinge snapped, and we tumbled inside. Maria barricaded the door with a desk, while I grabbed the emergency beacon box. Hands shaking, I slammed the switch. A piercing alarm ripped through the night, loud enough to shake windows, followed by a floodlight system activating around the station. Harsh white light blasted across the basin outside. And that's when we finally saw them. Not one creature, not two, dozens. Steam shaped their bodies, tall, thin, faceless forms moving like puppets, tied to the same invisible string. When the light hit them, they shriveled, collapsing into puddles of vapor, only to reform farther back in the darkness. They didn't flee. They simply retreated to where the light couldn't reach, waiting, watching. When backup arrived, the creatures were gone. Only the shattered shed, warped boardwalk, and frost-covered surfaces proved anything had happened. The official report claimed geothermal illusion, exhaustion, stress. But Maria transferred out of Yellowstone the next week. And me, I still patrol the basin sometimes, because whatever those things were, they're still out there, and they're waiting for the light to fail again. My name is Claire Henderson, and I was a seasonal ranger stationed at one of Yellowstone's most remote fire lookout towers during the summer of 2019. The tower sat atop a jagged ridge, surrounded by thick pine forests, miles from any road. Most people loved the view during the day, but nights were different. There was an eerie silence up there that pressed in on you, even when you were fully awake. The night this happened, I was alone, as most night shifts were. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No owls, no rustling leaves, nothing except the occasional whisper of wind. I was checking my logs when I heard the first knock. Light, hollow, deliberate. I froze, thinking it was a branch or perhaps some small animal. But then it came again, louder, sharper, resonating against the wooden walls of the tower. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" No response. My voice sounded strange, echoing unnaturally within the tower, like it had been stretched. The knocking continued in a rhythm, slow, measured. Then, faintly, a voice joined it, almost a whisper, repeating my name. "Claire. Claire." I spun toward the window, but all I could see was the black forest. The ridge dropped away steeply, and no one could have approached without me hearing their steps on the creaking wooden stairs. And yet, the sound persisted, coming from all around. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the wind or my imagination. But the rhythm of the knocking had changed. Now it was deliberate, almost mocking. Each knock felt like it was coming closer to the tower, though the stairs outside were empty. My heart raced as I reached for my flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line below. Nothing moved. Then the voice returned, clearer this time, not faint or distant, but as if someone were right beside me. "Claire, come down." It hissed my name with a tone that was both familiar and wrong, like it was my own voice twisted. My stomach churned. I hadn't told anyone I was alone up here tonight, yet whoever or whatever it was knew. I grabbed the radio, hoping to call the main station, but all I received was static. Then, amid the crackle, a faint echo. My own voice calling, "Help! Help!" but slower, distorted, dragging out my syllables. I dropped the radio, my pulse racing. A sudden bang shook the floor. The old wooden boards of the lookout creaked beneath the impact, and the tower shuddered as if something massive had struck it from below. My eyes darted toward the window again. Outside, shadows swirled unnaturally among the trees, moving in ways no human or animal could. I realized then that the forest itself seemed alive, watching, waiting. The banging continued, echoing through the wooden beams above me. I tried to convince myself that a branch or a rock had fallen, but the sound wasn't random. It was precise. Each strike on the tower seemed calculated, as if someone was marking a rhythm meant just for me. I hugged myself, trying to hold the fear at bay. Then came the whispers, hundreds of them, layered atop one another. They weren't words anymore, just fragmented syllables in my own voice. "Come down now. Don't leave." The cacophony grew louder with every second, the volume and urgency pressing into my ears. I backed away from the window, desperate to escape the unnatural voices. Suddenly, the floorboards groaned beneath my feet. Not like wood settling. Something was walking above me. I wasn't supposed to be able to hear anything up there. The staircase to the observation platform had no upper level, yet the sound was unmistakable. Heavy, slow footsteps pacing back and forth, circling my location. I reached for the emergency flare, my hands shaking violently. If anything came inside, I needed a way to protect myself. My mind raced with memories of training drills, but none had prepared me for a sentient force that could manipulate space, shadow, and sound all at once. The air grew thick with cold mist that had no origin. My breath came in white puffs, though the thermometer read a warm 65 degrees. Something was coming closer. Something that was not part of the forest, not part of the world as I knew it. I forced myself to climb the narrow stairs to the observation deck, hoping the open air would give me clarity. Every step creaked beneath me, announcing my movement to whatever was present. The wind outside swirled unnaturally around the tower, carrying faint whispers that mimicked my own voice. "Why are you here?" When I reached the deck, the forest stretched endlessly below, dark and empty. Yet the sensation of eyes on me was overwhelming. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, but nothing moved. Only shadows. Deep, inky shadows that twisted against logic, as if the trees themselves were bending, reaching. Then I noticed the reflection in the tower window. It wasn't my own. Behind me, a faint silhouette of a tall, thin figure stood perfectly still, its form indistinct, wreathed in mist. I spun around. Nothing. Only the empty deck, moonlight glinting off the railing. The whispers escalated into guttural tones, harsh and melodic at once. Come down, come down. They chanted in sync with the knocking that now pounded on the tower walls. My stomach nodded. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a human. I tried to descend quickly, but the stairs seemed longer than before. Each step felt heavier, resisted by some invisible force. My body ached as though the forest itself were pressing against me, bending the wooden structure into something alien. The air grew colder. Frost began forming on the railing, though there was no frost anywhere else. Something was waiting for me at the bottom. I finally reached the base of the lookout, my legs trembling and every nerve screaming at me. The forest stretched outward, dark and silent, yet I could still hear the faint tapping, the knocking that followed me down the stairs, now coming from every direction at once. My flashlight barely cut through the fog, and the trees appeared to twist unnaturally, their limbs reaching toward me like skeletal hands. Then I saw it. A shadow moving between the trunks, taller than any human, impossibly thin, gliding rather than walking. It didn't just observe me. It mimicked me, mirroring every small movement as I took a step back. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming to run. But I knew the creature could easily catch me in seconds. The whispers returned, now layered, echoing my own thoughts. Stay. Stay, stay. They weren't coming from a single direction. They were everywhere. I realized then that the forest itself was a conduit for this entity, feeding it my fear, my confusion. I ran toward the maintenance path, where the old ranger cabin sat. Every footstep felt heavier, as if the forest tried to pull me back. The shadow glided silently behind, never overtly attacking, but always present, always watching. I dared a glance. The mist formed into multiple figures, all moving with terrifying coordination. By the time I reached the cabin, I was soaked in sweat and trembling uncontrollably. The door was locked, but I forced it open and barricaded it with a fallen log. I didn't sleep that night. Inside the cabin, the air felt suffocating. The door rattled intermittently, though the wind was calm. My flashlight illuminated dust particles dancing in the mist that had somehow seeped inside. I could still hear the whispers through the walls, closer now, more urgent. Come, stay, forever. I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, stress, isolation. But then I saw fingerprints on the cabin window, wet and pale, as if someone or something had pressed against the glass from the outside. I wiped them, but new marks appeared almost immediately, moving downward like long, distorted fingers. I grabbed my radio to call the main station. "This is Ranger Henderson. I need immediate assistance," I said, my voice shaking. The static responded first. Then, slowly, my own voice came back from the speaker, but warped, echoing, "Help! Help! Stay!" Panic surged. I backed against the wall, gripping the emergency flare. I had to act, but I felt paralyzed. My mind screamed, my body froze, and the whispers grew louder, layering over themselves until coherent thought was impossible. Then came a scraping sound. Long, deliberate, moving along the cabin walls, circling me. I held my breath as the door shuddered under weight. Whatever it was, it could manipulate the cabin as easily as the fog outside. I realized then that escaping wouldn't be simple. The entity wasn't bound by physical barriers. It was in the forest, the cabin, and possibly in the very air around me. Hours passed, though I can't be sure how many. I stayed crouched behind a counter, flare gun at the ready. The cabin seemed alive, every creak and groan magnified by my fear. Outside, the fog thickened, moving like liquid, swirling around the cabin as if to suffocate it entirely. Then I saw movement at the window. A thin, tall silhouette, featureless and writhing, pressed against the glass. It was almost human in shape, but far too long, far too fluid. Every flicker of the flare reflected in its pale, wet-like skin. My stomach churned. I knew it was aware of my every heartbeat, my every thought. I tried to focus on rational escape. I had a jeep parked down the ridge. If I could make it there, I might survive. But stepping outside was unthinkable. The entity wasn't attacking. It was waiting, testing me. The air vibrated with the whispers, "Come. Stay forever." They penetrated the cabin walls, filling my head. I knew I couldn't run blind. I needed a plan. I grabbed my backpack, stuffing in flares, ropes, and any equipment that might help. My hands shook violently. The creature's shadow moved along the walls again, bending at impossible angles, slipping in and out of view like a liquid nightmare. I whispered to myself, "I will not stay. I will survive." And I forced the courage to open the cabin door. I stepped onto the ridge, my boots crunching on frost-tipped pine needles. The fog was a living wall, thick and almost solid, but I could see faint silhouettes moving within it, gliding rather than walking. Every shadow seemed to mirror me, waiting for me to falter. The whispers had intensified, now echoing in the trees themselves. "Stay. Forever. Stay." It wasn't just one voice. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, layered atop each other in my mind. My chest tightened, panic clawing at every rational thought. I saw movement off to the right. A path toward a smaller clearing appeared faintly. I sprinted, praying the creature wouldn't react instantly. Every time I glanced back, the fog bent around the entity, revealing its long, twisting form, following silently. Suddenly, something grabbed my ankle. I fell face first into frost-covered ground. My flashlight skidded away, leaving me in near darkness. The whispers surrounded me entirely, a crushing weight in the air. I scrambled, adrenaline surging, and spotted the jeep's lights in the distance. With every ounce of strength, I pulled myself forward. The fog seemed to retreat slightly as I ran, yet I could still hear a soft scraping behind me, always just out of sight, always closer than it should be. By the time I reached the vehicle, I was shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life, and I floored it down the ridge, the whispers fading only when the forest fell behind me. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main park road. By then, the first hints of dawn were breaking, painting the forest in muted grays. The fog that had stalked me was gone, leaving only the natural morning mist of Yellowstone. But the memory of those whispers lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I reported the incident immediately. Supervisors dismissed it as stress, isolation, and hallucination, the typical reasoning for things that cannot be explained. But I knew better. Something had been in the forest, waiting, watching. Not a wild animal, not human, something else entirely. That night, I dreamt of the tower. The fog returned, carrying that chorus of voices. I was back inside, hearing the knocks, feeling the cold mist curling around my skin. The shadows pressed against the windows again. I know I wasn't imagining it. I could feel the entity's awareness, not just of me, but of my thoughts, my fears, my body. Every detail of my night alone in the tower was imprinted in that presence. I never returned to that fire lookout. I requested a transfer and haven't spent a night there since. But every time I pass Yellowstone's ridges, especially at night, I remember the whispers and wonder if the forest ever truly forgets, or if it waits for the next ranger to come alone. Even now, years later, I cannot shake the feeling that something watches Yellowstone's remote towers at night. I've heard from other rangers who have worked there alone that they felt unseen eyes tracking them, heard faint whispers when no one else was around, and noticed shadows that behaved unnaturally. The forest is alive in ways that textbooks and training manuals cannot explain. The fire lookout wasn't just a structure, it was a beacon, a place where the veil between the ordinary and the supernatural thins. That night, the entity I encountered wasn't malevolent in the traditional sense. It wasn't attacking to kill. It was observing, learning, testing limits, and whispering in a voice it knew I could hear, a voice that could reach into the mind. I still patrol Yellowstone from time to time, but I avoid the ridges at night. I keep my distance from the abandoned towers. I warn any new rangers to stay in pairs, to check radios, to respect the forest as more than wilderness. Because whatever waits in the fog, in the abandoned lookouts, in the endless silent trees, it remembers. It waits. And it knows when a human is alone. I cannot say what it is, nor what it wants. I only know this. The echoes from the abandoned fire lookout are real, and the forest never forgets. My name is Lucas Martin, and I've been a Yellowstone Park Ranger for 5 years. I've experienced the usual dangers: wildlife encounters, sudden storms, lost hikers. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered on the east side trails in the summer of 2020. I was patrolling alone, hiking along a narrow, overgrown path that wound through a dense section of the forest. Sunlight filtered weakly through the thick canopy, casting shifting shadows on the ground. At first, it seemed like a normal patrol, checking trail markers and clearing fallen branches. Then I noticed something unusual. The trail markers were inconsistent. One would be intact, the next almost gone, and the following seemed freshly cut but oddly unnatural, as though someone had been deliberately moving them. I paused, scanning the surrounding woods. The air felt heavier than normal, thick with humidity and an almost imperceptible chill. Then I heard the faintest sound, a snapping of twigs, soft but deliberate, coming from behind. I turned quickly, but the forest appeared empty. No movement, no animals, just the rustle of leaves. I dismissed it as my imagination and continued, though unease settled in my chest. The path ahead seemed to stretch farther than it should, twisting and looping in ways that defied the map I carried. I began to feel as if the forest itself were reshaping around me, guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. As I pressed forward, the feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Every rustle, every snapped twig felt like a warning. I paused and shone my flashlight into the underbrush, even though the sun was still high. Shadows flickered unnaturally, twisting between the trees. Nothing fully formed, but something was definitely there. Then came the sound of footsteps. Not mine, not human. Heavy, deliberate, yet strangely silent, almost gliding over the ground. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice seemed to be swallowed by the forest, returning to me distorted and slow, like an echo that didn't belong. The trail suddenly split into two paths. One led toward the river, familiar from previous patrols. The other veered into thick underbrush, almost hidden. I knew instinctively I should take the safe path, but an inexplicable compulsion pushed me toward the hidden trail. My mind screamed to turn back, but my legs moved on their own. The shadows grew denser. Shapes flitted just beyond my vision, taller than deer, thinner than humans, moving fluidly between the trees. I caught glimpses of pale skin, or maybe mist, stretching unnaturally, bending around trunks. The air grew colder, my breath visible even though it was summer. I realized with sudden clarity that the forest was no longer just forest, it was hunting. I chose the hidden trail, knowing it was against my better judgment. The path narrowed quickly, almost closing in around me. Branches scratched at my jacket and face, but it wasn't natural movement. The forest felt alive, shifting around me. Every step seemed to echo in unnatural rhythm, as though something were pacing me. Then I noticed footprints, not human, long, narrow, with toes bent backward like claws, fresh, leading deeper into the undergrowth. I followed cautiously, hoping they were from a lost hiker, anything rational. But the further I went, the more distorted the forest became. Trees bent at impossible angles, moss and lichen forming shapes that resembled faces, screaming silently. I stopped to check my GPS. The device spun wildly, unable to locate my position. Every coordinate read the same, the very heart of the forest, though I had been walking north for nearly an hour. Panic rose. The forest was no longer a place to traverse. It was a maze with intent. Then I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, carrying my name. "Lucas! Lucas!" My heart raced as the whisper repeated, growing closer. I swung my flashlight around, nothing visible, yet shadows clung to the edges of the beam, sliding in perfect synchronization with my movements. Something in the air pressed against me, tangible, cold, and wet. My instincts screamed to run, but I was trapped by fear and the strange, almost magnetic pull of the trail. I forced myself to keep moving, adrenaline and fear propelling me forward. The whispering grew louder, overlapping with multiple voices, each repeating my name, echoing from different directions. I clutched my radio and shouted for backup, but the device emitted only static, distorted into a voice mimicking my own. Lost. Forever lost. The forest thickened unnaturally. Branches bent to block my path, forcing me deeper into the twisting trail. Shapes darted at the edges of my vision, tall, thin, faceless figures, gliding just above the ground. They didn't rush me. They merely observed, moving in perfect synchronization, forcing me to feel exposed, hunted. Then the trail opened into a clearing. The ground was littered with broken sticks and debris, arranged in odd geometric patterns. In the center lay a faint, pulsing mist, glowing slightly with a pale green light. My instincts screamed at me to turn, but something in the forest compelled me closer. As I stepped forward, I felt a pressure behind me, like hands pressing against my back through the air. The whispers intensified, merging into a single chorus. "Stay, stay, stay." I spun around, flashlight swinging wildly. The figures were closer now, dozens of them, moving in perfect formation, yet still impossible to fully see. Their forms flickered between solid and mist, always partially hidden. I realized then that the forest itself had become sentient, and I was its prey. I ran. Every step on the narrow path felt like a lifetime. The forest shifted around me, roots reaching, branches twisting to slow me down. The whispers followed, no longer distant, now inside my head. "You cannot leave. You cannot leave." Branches whipped against my face, tearing clothing, but I kept moving. Occasionally, I glimpsed movement in the shadows, a figure rising from the mist, stretching unnaturally tall, then melting back into vapor as if the forest itself were swallowing it. My chest burned, lungs screaming, but stopping was not an option. The GPS on my belt spun wildly. It could no longer guide me. The map I carried was meaningless. Every direction seemed to loop back to the same clearing, the same glowing mist. The forest was no longer a place of trails. It was a trap, alive and calculating. Then I saw a faint light through the trees. The distant ranger station. My only hope. The forest seemed to resist. Branches snapping suddenly under invisible weight. Roots shifting across the path, slowing my escape. Every second felt measured, as if the forest were watching my heartbeat and pacing me deliberately. Finally, I broke through the dense undergrowth onto the open path. The light of the station was brighter now. I stumbled, panting, and reached the road. Behind me, the forest fell silent again. But I knew it hadn't forgotten me. I reached the ranger station, but the relief was fleeting. My hands shook violently as I slammed the door behind me, barricading it with chairs and equipment. The forest outside was quiet, eerily quiet, but I could still feel it. That sentient awareness pressing against the walls, watching, waiting. I radioed for backup, and the response was immediate. Other rangers were on their way, but the voices inside my head hadn't stopped. "You cannot leave. Stay." They were subtle, almost hypnotic, urging me to turn back. I wiped sweat from my brow, struggling to regain control over my thoughts. As I waited, I noticed faint impressions outside the window. Footprints in the dirt that hadn't been there before. They formed a perfect circle around the station, each step too long to belong to a human. The ground seemed disturbed, as if something had been pacing, waiting for my arrival. I knew then that whatever was in the forest wasn't bound by the rules of nature. It could move silently, strike fear directly into your mind, and manipulate the very environment around you. I felt trapped, yet safe only by the thin barrier of walls and light. The whispers faded slowly as dawn approached, retreating into the shadows of the forest. I knew, however, that this encounter was far from over. The entity had marked me. It remembered. By the time backup arrived, I was shaking uncontrollably. 2 rangers climbed through the station door, weapons drawn and flashlights cutting through the dim interior. They asked what had happened. I told them everything. The trail, the whispers, the faceless figures. They exchanged uneasy glances, but reassured me that nothing unusual had been reported in that area before. We exited the station cautiously to survey the surrounding forest. The trail I had followed had vanished. Not just overgrown, but gone, replaced by normal underbrush and dirt. The glowing mist, the strange footprints, the shapes in the shadows. All traces erased, as though the forest had never been disturbed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The forest hadn't abandoned me. It had let me live, but on its own terms. It had observed, learned, and then retreated. I realized that whatever haunted those woods didn't just want to scare. It wanted to understand, to study the humans who dared to intrude. That day, I filed a detailed report, knowing it would likely be dismissed. I couldn't explain what I had seen, and rational explanations fell flat. But deep down, I knew the forest was alive in ways no training or experience could prepare a ranger for. That evening, I couldn't sleep. The memory of the whispers lingered in my mind. Every creak of the cabin, every distant owl call, sounded like the echo of the forest's voice. My dreams were invaded by the same faceless figures, gliding through mist, their presence oppressive and intelligent. I returned to the ranger station the next day to inspect the area. Nothing seemed unusual. The trails were intact, no footprints, no signs of disturbance. Yet, when I walked along the path where the mist had pulsed, I could feel a weight in the air, as if invisible eyes were tracking every movement. Other rangers occasionally mentioned strange occurrences: missing trail markers, hikers reporting whispers or fleeting shadows, GPS devices failing inexplicably. I began piecing together stories, realizing the phenomenon wasn't isolated to me. The forest itself seemed to have a pattern, a hidden intelligence, marking humans it deemed worthy of observation. I now understand that this entity was patient. It didn't attack openly. It observed, manipulated, and sometimes allowed its prey to escape, but never completely. Those who survived carried the memory, a lingering fear that gnawed its sanity. From that point forward, I avoided the east side trails at night, respecting the invisible intelligence that had tested me. The forest waits, and I know it remembers. Months later, I heard a report from another ranger on patrol. Hikers had vanished along the same trail I had taken. Search parties found no trace, only broken trail markers arranged in strange geometric patterns. I knew instantly what had occurred. The forest had claimed attention again, testing and feeding on fear, leaving no evidence of its presence for outsiders. I returned once more, cautiously, during daylight. The trail seemed normal, yet I could sense the weight in the air, the silent intelligence watching. Every step I took felt measured, observed. The forest wasn't passive. It was aware. It remembered me, and it remembered all who had walked its trails. I spoke quietly to myself. It doesn't want to harm, just observe, just test. But even as I said it, the back of my mind screamed otherwise. The faceless figures, the whispers, the distortions of reality. They weren't accidents. They were part of the forest's will. I realized that anyone alone in these woods could become part of its test, never to be seen again. The line between the natural and supernatural in Yellowstone was thinner than anyone believed. I've since shared my experience with new rangers, warning them never to hike alone in those areas after dusk. Most are skeptical, dismissing my words as superstition. But I've seen the forest's intelligence firsthand, its patience, precision, and uncanny awareness of human presence. I've learned to respect the boundaries. The forest is alive in the ways we cannot measure, and it doesn't forget. It watches, remembers, and sometimes lets you go, but only on its own terms. The whispers, the shadows, the twisted trails, they are all signals, warnings from an entity beyond comprehension. I still patrol Yellowstone, but the east side trails are off limits to me. Every now and then, when I pass by, I feel it. A silent presence, observing, waiting. I think of those hikers who vanished, and I wonder if they were tested or trapped, or perhaps forever part of the forest's memory. No one can explain it, and the official reports never acknowledge it. But I know what I saw, what I heard, and what followed me. The forest is alive, sentient, and patient. And if you ever find yourself alone on a trail in Yellowstone, my name is Samantha Blake, and I've been a Yellowstone Ranger for 6 years. One summer night in 2021, I was conducting a routine patrol near one of the lesser-known backcountry camping sites. The sun had set hours ago, leaving only the silver glow of the moon to illuminate the dense forest. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and a low mist began forming along the ground. I was walking slowly, flashlight in hand, when I first noticed something unusual. A small tent was set up in the clearing, but no vehicle tracks or human presence were nearby. The campfire was cold, yet the smoke rose in faint swirls, as if disturbed recently. My first thought was that a camper had wandered off, but as I approached, a chill ran down my spine. The tent flap twitched gently, yet no wind stirred the forest. I called out, "Hello? Ranger Blake here. Anyone in the campsite?" Silence answered me. Then, faintly, I heard a whisper, "Don't leave." I froze. The voice was soft, childlike, yet urgent and unnerving. My heart raced as I scanned the perimeter. The trees seemed darker here, shadows folding unnaturally, like they were hiding something. Every instinct told me to back away, yet I felt drawn closer to the tent. Something about it didn't feel human, yet it radiated awareness, a presence that could sense me. I circled the tent cautiously, flashlight trembling in my grip. The whisper returned, more insistent this time. "Don't leave. Stay." I peered inside the tent but saw only shadows and the faint outline of an empty cot. No belongings, no backpack, nothing that indicated human habitation. Then I noticed the footprints. Small, bare, leading from the tent into the surrounding trees. But the prints weren't human. They were too small, too symmetrical, almost perfect, and they glowed faintly under my flashlight. My pulse quickened. Whatever this was, it had left a trail that defied nature. I radioed in, trying to remain calm. "Base, I've found an abandoned campsite near the back trail. No humans visible. Requesting backup." The response was delayed, static filled. Then, faintly, my own voice came back through the speaker, distorted. "Stay, stay, stay." Panic surged, and I stumbled backward. The mist thickened, curling around my ankles. Shapes moved just beyond the light, glimpses of pale figures gliding silently among the trees. I realized I was not alone. Something was observing me, waiting, almost playing a cruel game of patience. Despite the fear, I forced myself to focus. If I wanted to leave safely, I needed to understand what I was dealing with. But the forest seemed determined to keep me here. I decided to follow the footprints, reasoning that tracing the trail might lead me to a camper or evidence of human presence. The forest grew darker and more oppressive with each step. Trees leaned inward unnaturally, their limbs stretching like skeletal fingers, almost closing off the path behind me. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, echoing directly in my mind. "Stay, stay, stay forever." They weren't just sounds. They were sensations, pressing on my thoughts, twisting logic and reason. My legs moved automatically, drawn deeper into the woods, my rational mind screaming for me to stop. As I pushed forward, I noticed shadows moving in impossible ways. Branches bent to form archways, twisting and flexing around me. Something in the mist seemed to mimic my movements, gliding silently but always perfectly aligned with my pace. It was studying me. Then I saw it, a faint silhouette, standing motionless among the trees. It was small, childlike in form, yet unnerving. Its head tilted unnaturally, and its eyes, or what I assumed were eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness. My flashlight illuminated it briefly, but as I blinked, it vanished, leaving no trace but the whispers that now felt inside my skull. I realized then that this was not just a phantom camper. It was something far more intelligent, something that could manipulate perception, fog, and even sound to ensnare its prey. My fear intensified, but I pressed on, determined to reach the edge of the clearing. Every step felt measured, as though the forest and its unseen inhabitants were pacing me. I could feel the presence of multiple figures now, faint glimpses in the mist, pale and fluid, moving with intent. The whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words and phrases. "Why are you here?" They mimicked my voice, my thoughts, every movement I made. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I knew running blindly would be worse. I had to understand the rules of this haunting, if any existed. I followed the trail deeper into the forest, and the mist thickened to ankle height. Shapes twisted in the fog, gliding just beyond clear vision, observing, waiting. The air grew cold, biting at exposed skin, though it was midsummer. My breath came out in visible puffs. Suddenly, I stumbled into a small clearing. The tent I had investigated earlier was here again, impossibly close despite my movement away from it. The mist pulsed around it, glowing faintly green. The shadows paused, watching me. I understood then that the forest wasn't just alive. It was capable of manipulation, bending space and distance to trap or confuse its prey. I felt trapped, the whispers pressing urgently into my mind. "Stay. Forever. Stay." Every instinct screamed at me to escape, but every path seemed to loop back to the tent, to the clearing, to the entity that haunted these woods. I tried to leave the clearing, moving carefully along a path I thought led away. But the forest resisted. Branches twisted underfoot, roots shifted, and shadows fell in impossible angles. Every step felt like wading through a living trap. Then I noticed footprints circling the tent, dozens of them, each glowing faintly, small and symmetrical, leading nowhere. The whispers intensified, now chanting as one. "Stay, stay, stay, forever." My mind screamed at me, but I realized the forest itself was playing with me, testing my resolve, my fear, my sanity. I approached the tent again, determined to confront whatever it was. The flap twitched violently, as if something inside knew I had returned. I shouted, demanding to see whoever was there. The forest responded with silence, then a sudden rush of cold wind, knocking me back several feet. The fog shifted, revealing dozens of faint, childlike silhouettes, gliding slowly around me. They didn't attack. They didn't speak. They simply observed, perfectly synchronized, forming a haunting tableau of unnatural intelligence. I retreated carefully, knowing the forest allowed me to survive, for now. Every instinct told me to leave immediately, to never return to this clearing alone. The phantom camper, if it could be called that, was not human. It was an entity that thrived on fear, manipulation, and isolation. Even as I made my way back to the main trail, I felt the forest's gaze follow me, persistent and intelligent. It remembered me. It would wait. And it would test the next ranger who walked these trails alone. I eventually reached the main trail, but relief was fleeting. The forest around me felt charged, almost sentient, as though it were assessing whether I had learned its lesson. The mist clung stubbornly to the ground, moving in subtle, deliberate currents, as if it were alive and aware of my every motion. I reported the phantom camper and the mysterious footprints to the ranger station. My colleagues listened politely, but dismissed it as a combination of stress, isolation, and imagination. But I knew better. I had felt the presence, had seen the impossible shapes glide silently among the trees, had heard whispers that invaded my very thoughts. Later, I returned cautiously during daylight to document the sight. The tent had vanished. The footprints, the glowing mist, the twisted shadows, gone. The forest looked ordinary, deceptively peaceful. It was as if it had never been disturbed at all. Even so, I could feel the memory of that night lingering. The entity hadn't abandoned the area. It was waiting, patient, invisible, and always aware. It didn't need to attack to assert control. The fear it instilled was enough. I realized that Yellowstone held secrets that no patrol manual could explain. Places where reality bent, and the forest's intelligence tested those who ventured too far alone. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Every sound, a branch snapping, a distant animal call, echoed the whispers I had heard in the clearing. In my dreams, the childlike silhouettes returned, gliding silently, observing, testing, and beckoning me toward the misty clearing. I returned the next day, flashlight in hand, determined to understand more. The forest seemed ordinary at first, yet I could feel it, a subtle pressure, a watching awareness. Every movement of the wind, every ripple of the mist seemed calculated, deliberate. I followed the faintest traces of the previous night. Flattened grass, slight impressions in the soil, subtle disturbances in the moss. They led me back to the clearing, and though nothing was visible, the mist pulsed faintly, as if the entity was aware of my return. It didn't attack. It never attacked. It studied. It observed. It tested patience and fear. I realized then that this entity thrived on isolation, feeding on tension and manipulating perception to create terror. It existed in a space between reality and imagination, exploiting both. I left the clearing carefully, aware that any sudden movement might provoke attention. Even though the entity was not actively aggressive, I felt its gaze like a weight on my shoulders, pressing into my mind. Weeks passed, but the experience never left me. I heard from fellow rangers about missing hikers and strange phenomena in the same backcountry area. Radios crackled with static during night patrols, GPS devices malfunctioned, and whispers were reported by multiple individuals. A pattern I could no longer ignore. I returned with a small team for a controlled investigation. During daylight, nothing appeared unusual. The forest seemed benign. Yet, as dusk fell, the air thickened unnaturally, and the familiar chill returned. Mist began to gather at ground level, curling around roots and trunks in delicate yet deliberate patterns. Then I saw them again, pale, childlike silhouettes, gliding silently among the trees. Not all were fully formed, some partially dissolved into the mist. Yet their presence was undeniable. The team froze in shock, some unable to move. I felt the familiar pressure in my mind, the whispering chorus, echoing in multiple voices. Stay, 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 forever. We retreated, careful not to provoke them. The entity allowed us to leave, but its presence followed mentally, embedding itself as a persistent unease, a constant reminder of the forest's hidden intelligence. I understood fully that Yellowstone's backcountry was alive in ways beyond comprehension, and those who dared venture alone were vulnerable to its subtle manipulations. Months later, I spoke to the families of missing hikers and discovered disturbing similarities. All reported small signs before disappearances: flickering tents, strange whispers, glowing footprints, and a sense of being watched. None survived long enough to describe the entities, but the pattern was undeniable. I returned to the clearing alone one last time, determined to leave a record. The forest seemed unchanged, ordinary in appearance. Yet I felt it. Subtle pressure in the air, almost like breath on my neck. Shadows shifted without source. Mist pulsed faintly, and I realized that this place held a memory of the entity's presence. I left behind markers, notes, and photographs, but knew that no one could truly understand the forest's intelligence. It was a living test, patient and silent, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. Even years later, I avoid the backcountry camping trails at night. The whispers, the mist, and the pale figures may never attack directly, but their presence lingers, an unspoken reminder of the power hidden in Yellowstone's forgotten corners. I've shared my experiences with new rangers, emphasizing caution, teamwork, and respect for the forest. Skeptics dismiss my story, claiming imagination or exaggeration. But I have felt it firsthand. The entity that haunts the clearing is intelligent, patient, and aware. It doesn't need violence. It manipulates, observes, and lures fear from within. The phantom camper was not a being in the traditional sense. It was part of the forest itself, a sentient presence using form, mist, and sound to interact with humans. It tested, studied, and occasionally allowed escape, leaving an indelible impression on its witnesses. I continue to patrol Yellowstone, but I never step into that backcountry clearing alone. Every time I pass nearby, I feel a weight, an unseen gaze measuring my resolve, my courage, my fear. I can't explain what I saw or heard, and official reports dismiss it entirely. Yet the forest remembers. It waits. And I know the phantom camper, that childlike, gliding, whispering presence, will remain, testing and observing the next ranger who ventures too far, too alone. If you ever hike alone in Yellowstone after dusk, remember this. The forest is not passive. It is aware, it is patient, and it never forgets. My name is Derek Lawson, and I've been a Yellowstone Ranger for 7 years. I've seen my share of wild animals, lost hikers, and unpredictable weather. But nothing could have prepared me for the encounter I had near the Hayden Valley Trail in late autumn of 2019. I was patrolling alone, the golden leaves crunching underfoot, when I first sensed it, a weight in the air, a presence that made the hairs on my neck stand at attention. At first, I dismissed it as nerves, the isolation playing tricks on my mind. But as I advanced deeper into the valley, I noticed something strange. The animal tracks were inconsistent. Some were enormous, larger than any bear I had seen, yet they moved silently, leaving no noise, no scent. Others seemed human, but the stride was wrong, the depth impossible for a normal person. The forest felt alive in an unusual way. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the ground, twisting and bending as if observing my movements. I began hearing faint whispers just at the edge of hearing, a barely perceptible murmur. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here." I stopped, trying to locate the source, but the sounds seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Something was watching me, intelligent and patient, moving with the shadows, yet never fully revealed. My gut told me to turn back, but I pressed onward. Curiosity and duty intertwining dangerously. The valley grew quieter with every step. No birds, no wind, nothing but the crunch of leaves under my boots. Yet the feeling of being observed intensified. I paused, scanning the surrounding woods, flashlight ready despite the fading daylight. Then I saw it. A figure at the far edge of the clearing. Tall, humanoid, yet impossibly still. Its face was obscured by shadows, and it didn't move like an animal or a human. I froze, trying to discern whether it was real or a trick of the light. The figure seemed to vanish and reappear, always at the edge of my vision, just beyond the trees. I radioed the station, keeping my voice steady, describing what I saw. The reply was calm, dismissive. "Probably a ranger or camper, Derek. Maintain distance." But I knew it wasn't human. The air was too still, too heavy. The presence emanated something cold and intelligent, aware of every thought racing through my mind. I continued cautiously, following the trail along the valley. The figure appeared intermittently, sometimes closer, sometimes further away, always observing. Its patience unnerved me more than outright aggression would have. I realized this wasn't a random haunting. It was a conscious watcher, analyzing me, gauging my responses, waiting. Every instinct screamed for me to retreat, but duty tethered me forward. The sun dipped below the horizon, and darkness crept into the valley. I turned on my flashlight fully, beams cutting through the encroaching shadows, revealing empty spaces where the figure had been. Yet I felt it closer. The forest seemed to pulse with awareness, each rustle of leaves or snapping twig carrying intention. I stumbled upon a patch of disturbed earth. Deep impressions, far too large for any human, yet perfectly spaced and deliberate. They were almost symmetrical, leading toward the tree line. I followed cautiously, flashlight scanning for movement, but the forest remained still, oppressive in its silence. Then came the whispers, soft and insidious, seeming to echo directly inside my mind. "You can't leave. You can't leave." My pulse quickened, and I realized that fear alone wasn't what this presence sought. It studied, tested, and drew attention through psychological pressure. I spotted the figure again, this time closer, partially illuminated by moonlight. Its features were barely human, elongated limbs, faceless shadow where a head should be, yet undeniably intelligent. It did not advance. It did not flee. It simply watched, exuding a presence that made the hairs on my arms and neck stand at rigid attention. The forest felt alive around it, twisting subtly, guiding me, nudging me along a path of its design. I understood instinctively that retreating blindly would only worsen the situation. I tried to keep calm, speaking aloud to myself to maintain clarity. Every decision I made felt critical. One wrong move could provoke the watcher, yet the figure made no aggressive motion. It simply observed, a patient predator that understood me better than I understood myself. As I moved along the trail, I noticed the forest itself seemed to cooperate with the entity. Trees bent slightly to obscure paths, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and patches of mist obscured areas I had already traversed. The valley had become a living labyrinth, designed to trap or disorient intruders. The whispers grew louder, more distinct, layering over each other in distorted harmony. Turn back. You belong here. Forever. My heart raced, but I forced myself to think clearly. The entity wanted a reaction, fear, panic, confusion. I had to outthink it, to remain calm and methodical despite the unnatural pressure. Ahead, the figure moved again, almost teasingly, gliding effortlessly between trees. The lack of sound was unnerving. It wasn't hunting in a conventional sense. It was studying, calculating, testing boundaries. I realized that my presence here had been anticipated. Every move I made had been observed, and the valley had been preparing me for this confrontation. I had to maintain control or risk being trapped mentally and possibly physically in this twisted wilderness. I stopped at a small clearing, heart pounding, flashlight shaking in my hands. The figure appeared at the far edge, standing perfectly still. Moonlight glinted faintly off its elongated limbs, the faceless shadow exuding an awareness that pressed directly against my mind. I tried to speak, reasoning aloud, telling myself it might retreat if I remained calm. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling phrase. You can't leave. Not yet. Every instinct screamed to flee. But I understood the danger was an immediate attack. The danger was in losing control of my mind, of being manipulated by fear. I took a deep breath and slowly backed toward the trail, keeping eyes fixed on the figure. The forest seemed to shift subtly, branches bending as if to obstruct my path. Yet I continued steadily. The figure didn't follow. It simply observed, patient, almost indifferent, yet undeniably intelligent. Once I reached the main trail, I moved quickly toward the ranger station, flashlight cutting through the growing darkness. The presence did not pursue, but I felt its gaze, a lingering awareness that would not vanish. I understood then that the forest, and whatever inhabited it, had memory, patience, and intelligence. Even today, I avoid the Hayden Valley after dusk. The watcher may not harm directly, but it studies, it waits, and it knows. And anyone alone in these woods may find themselves the next subject of its silent scrutiny. I reached the ranger station, yet the sense of being watched never left. The valley had imprinted itself into my mind, and I could feel the presence lingering just beyond the tree line, patient and calculating. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal call felt amplified, as if the forest was testing my awareness. I reported the incident to the station, describing the tall, faceless figure, the glowing footprints, and the unnatural whispers. Most dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations, but a few senior rangers nodded knowingly, their silence confirming that such phenomena were not unheard of. Determined to document my experience, I returned the following day with cameras and recording equipment. By midday, everything seemed normal. Trails, trees, and undergrowth appeared unchanged. Yet subtle signs hinted otherwise. Broken branches arranged in odd patterns, impressions in the soil too symmetrical to be natural, and mist curling unnaturally around roots. It was as if the forest itself was alive, reshaping reality and guiding me along paths it had designed. The figure did not appear directly, but I felt its awareness pressing, calculating, observing. By nightfall, the whispers returned faintly, echoing in my thoughts. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. The forest was patient, testing my resilience, my fear, and my sanity. I understood then that survival depended on calm, focus, and respect for the forest's hidden intelligence. That evening, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ranger cabin and gust of wind sounded like whispers in my ears. In dreams, the faceless figure returned, gliding silently among twisted trees, its elongated limbs unnervingly fluid, observing, testing, waiting. I returned to the valley during daylight to inspect further. At first glance, the forest seemed ordinary, yet the feeling of being observed persisted. Every step I took felt measured, as if the trees themselves were guiding me. The figure didn't appear openly, but I sensed it. A presence just beyond my perception, patient and calculating. Following subtle traces, flattened leaves, impressions in moss, slight disturbances in soil, I reached the clearing once more. The tent from previous campers was gone, yet the mist pulsed faintly, hinting that the entity remembered, waiting. The whispers intensified, almost forming coherent phrases. You cannot leave. Not yet. Stay. I realized the entity thrived on fear and anticipation, manipulating both environment and perception to create terror. We left cautiously, avoiding sudden movements. The forest seemed to breathe around us, guiding and obstructing, a living labyrinth designed to confound intruders. Even after retreating, the memory lingered, a constant reminder of the silent watcher in Yellowstone's hidden intelligence. Weeks later, I heard reports from hikers and rangers alike. GPS devices malfunctioned, radios emitted static, and multiple people reported whispers or fleeting glimpses of tall, faceless silhouettes. The pattern was unmistakable. Yellowstone's backcountry concealed an intelligence that observed, tested, and fed on fear. I returned with a small team for a controlled investigation. During daylight, the forest appeared normal, yet an oppressive awareness pressed against us. As dusk fell, mist began rising from the ground, curling and twisting unnaturally. Shadows elongated, almost bending independently, and the tall, faceless figure appeared intermittently, gliding silently among trees. It did not attack, it simply watched. The whispers coalesced inside our minds. Stay, 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 forever. Fear was its tool, observation its method, patience its weapon. The forest itself seemed complicit, bending the environment subtly to enhance disorientation. We left carefully, each step deliberate, knowing the entity allowed our escape but monitored our reactions. Its intelligence was undeniable, and the memory of the valley would stay with us forever. A silent warning for all who dared venture alone. Months later, I pieced together reports of missing hikers. They all shared small signs, whispers, unusual footprints, subtle disturbances in the forest, fleeting glimpses of a tall, faceless figure. No one survived long enough to fully explain what they experienced, yet the consistency was undeniable. I revisited the clearing alone, determined to leave a record. The forest appeared normal, deceptively calm, yet I felt the awareness pressing on me, cold and calculating. Shadows shifted subtly, mist pulsed faintly, and the memory of the entity's presence permeated every tree and rock. It was then I realized that the silent watcher wasn't merely an entity. It was part of the forest itself. A sentient intelligence, patient and observant, manipulating space, perception, and fear. Those who ventured alone were vulnerable to its subtle tests, and survival depended on caution, respect, and calm resolve. I left behind notes, markers, and photographs, though I knew they could not convey the true nature of what haunted the valley. Yellowstone's backcountry is alive in ways no patrol manual or ranger training could prepare anyone for. Even today, I avoid the Hayden Valley trail after dusk. The watcher remembers, waits, and studies every intruder, patient and unrelenting. I continue my work as a Yellowstone ranger. Yet the memory of the silent watcher remains vivid. It never attacked, never spoke directly. Yet it influenced my every step, my thoughts, my perception. It manipulated fear, observation, and isolation with precision only a sentient intelligence could manage. The figure was not a conventional predator. It was the forest itself, taking form, using mist, shadows, and whispers to interact with humans. It tested patience, mental resilience, and courage, leaving indelible marks on those who encountered it. I now patrol the backcountry with extreme caution. Even on daylight hikes, the awareness lingers. I have learned that survival in these woods is not about confrontation, but about understanding and respecting forces beyond comprehension. The silent watcher may not harm directly, but it studies, observes, and waits. It remembers the footsteps, the whispers, and the fear it instills. Anyone alone in the Hayden Valley after dusk may find themselves the next subject of its patient, calculating observation. If you ever hike alone in Yellowstone after dark, remember this: the forest is sentient. It sees you, it studies you, and it never forgets. My name is Lucas Warren, and I've been a Yellowstone Ranger for nearly a decade. I've encountered bears, wolves, and the unpredictable fury of nature. But nothing prepared me for the terror of the howling woods. It began one late October evening when I was patrolling alone near the northeastern backcountry. The air was cold and heavy with mist, and the forest was eerily silent, the usual animal sounds completely absent. As I followed a narrow trail, I noticed the first signs of something unusual. The trees seemed unnaturally twisted, their branches forming jagged silhouettes against the dimming sky. A low, guttural howl echoed through the woods. But it wasn't a wolf. The sound was elongated, distorted, almost human, yet horrifyingly inhuman at the same time. I froze, trying to locate its source. The howl repeated, closer this time, moving through the trees with impossible speed and direction. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, but I was rooted by fear and curiosity. Something was out there, intelligent, patient, and aware of my presence. As I advanced cautiously, the mist thickened, curling around my boots and the roots of the trees. The howls seemed to come from all directions, overlapping, forming whispers that echoed inside my mind. You don't belong here. You can't leave. I realized immediately that this was no ordinary predator. The forest itself had become a hunting ground, alive with a consciousness that defied reason. The howls continued, surrounding me, moving with unnatural precision. I shined my flashlight through the dense fog, but the beam revealed nothing. No animal, no human, only shadows and the twisted forest. Yet I felt eyes on me, invisible but attentive. The whispers grew louder, forming fragmented words in my mind. Turn back. You're not safe. You cannot leave. My pulse raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. Panic would only make me vulnerable. Every step forward felt deliberate, measured against the forest's silent observation. I noticed footprints in the soil, but they weren't animal or human. They were elongated, almost skeletal, and glowed faintly under the flashlight. Some were enormous, others tiny, moving in ways that defied natural gait. I realized the forest itself was manipulating perception, testing me, observing my reactions, and perhaps even feeding on my fear. Then I saw movement. Pale figures darting between trees, gliding effortlessly, never fully revealed. Their shapes were humanoid, yet distorted, faces obscured, limbs unnaturally long. I felt a chill that penetrated my bones, as if the forest's consciousness had reached out to touch my very thoughts. Every instinct screamed at me to leave immediately, but the forest seemed to bend reality around me, forcing me deeper into its heart, into the zone where the howls and whispers dominated every sense. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trail seemed to shift under my feet. Every tree, every branch, every patch of mist seemed to have been rearranged. The howls grew louder, overlapping, forming a chorus that resonated deep in my chest. They weren't animal cries. They were intelligent, deliberate, almost mocking. The pale figures reappeared intermittently, always at the edges of my vision. Some vanished into mist, others merged with shadows, and every appearance felt like a deliberate test. I felt watched from multiple angles, as if the forest had eyes in every direction, tracking my every move. The whispers now formed distinct phrases, repeating in my mind, "You cannot leave. You cannot leave. Stay." I realized the forest itself had become a sentient trap, feeding on fear and anticipation, manipulating perception to ensnare the unwary. I found a small clearing and decided to rest briefly, knowing I had to conserve strength. But even here I wasn't alone. The mist pulsed faintly, and the elongated humanoid figures glided silently around the perimeter, invisible but present. I could feel their attention, cold and calculating. The forest seemed alive, not merely with wildlife, but with intelligence, patience, and awareness. I understood then that the howling woods were not haunted in the traditional sense. They were hunting ground, observation post, and psychological trap, all in one. I continued forward cautiously, flashlight beam cutting through the dense mist. Every movement was deliberate. The forest seemed to test my perception, making familiar paths unfamiliar, landmarks shifting subtly as if alive. Every snapped twig or falling leaf felt amplified, echoing in my mind alongside the persistent whispers. You cannot leave. Stay. Stay. I discovered more footprints, enormous, small, human-like, and impossibly elongated. They formed patterns that made no logical sense, guiding me deeper into the forest, toward areas where visibility dropped and mist thickened unnaturally. The howls were now omnipresent, resonating from all directions simultaneously. The pale humanoid figures appeared again, gliding between the trees, partially obscured by mist, their elongated limbs moving fluidly. They did not attack but watched with intelligence, analyzing, studying. The forest itself seemed to pulse in sync with their movements, bending shadows and mist to manipulate my senses. I realized that the entity or entities in the howling woods didn't rely on violence. They relied on observation, fear, and psychological control. Each step forward was a negotiation with the forest's sentience, each breath measured under the invisible gaze of the silent hunters. As I advanced, I understood fully that retreating blindly could worsen my situation, as the forest manipulated perception and memory. Survival would require patience, focus, and understanding of its unnatural logic. I reached another small clearing, heart pounding. The mist thickened to waist level, curling around my legs. The pale figures were more numerous now, gliding silently, observing, each movement deliberate. Their faces were obscured, elongated limbs stretching unnaturally, yet their intelligence was palpable. The howls had become a chorus, echoing in multiple directions, sometimes merging with whispers that seemed to originate inside my mind. You cannot leave. You will stay. Forever. I realized the forest itself had become a sentient labyrinth, using the figures, shadows, mist, and sound to manipulate and terrify. I carefully navigated the clearing, keeping flashlight fixed ahead, trying to maintain control over my thoughts and fear. The forest's awareness pressed on me, yet it allowed me to proceed, testing patience and resilience rather than attacking directly. Eventually, I found a path leading toward a familiar ranger trail. I moved quickly, but I could feel the forest's intelligence tracking my every step. It wasn't blind or passive. It calculated, observed, and adapted. Once back on the main trail, I paused to look back. Shadows shifted among the trees, the mist pulsed faintly, and the elongated humanoid figures seemed to watch me disappear. I understood then that the howling woods were alive in ways no ranger could fully comprehend, and those who ventured there alone after dark would face its patient, calculating awareness. Back at the ranger station, I reported everything. The elongated humanoid figures, the shifting trails, the whispers that seemed to penetrate my mind. Most of the senior staff dismissed it as imagination or stress. But a few exchanged glances that confirmed my fears were not unique. The howling woods had a reputation even among experienced rangers. Determined to document the phenomena, I returned the next day with cameras, motion sensors, and audio recorders. During daylight, the forest seemed ordinary, benign even. But subtle hints betrayed its unnatural intelligence. Branches were broken in precise angles, footprints appeared and disappeared, and patches of mist twisted as if responding to my movements. As night fell, the forest's awareness returned. The pale humanoid figures reappeared, gliding silently, partially obscured by mist. The howls returned too, distorted and overlapping, forming a chorus that reverberated through the valley. The whispers infiltrated my mind. You cannot leave. Stay, stay, stay. The forest seemed alive with intelligence, observing, calculating, testing my responses to fear and curiosity. Every shadow, every ripple of mist, every distorted sound became a psychological weapon, drawing me deeper into its labyrinthine heart. I realized then that the howling woods did not need to attack. Its power lay in manipulation, in observation, in forcing intruders to confront terror without visible threat. Survival required calm, patience, and unwavering focus. That night, sleep was impossible. Every sound outside the cabin, a gust of wind, a snapping branch, became amplified, distorted into whispers and faint howls. Even in dreams, the figures returned, moving effortlessly through the mist, observing, testing, and feeding on my fear. I returned to the forest the next day, cautious but determined. The daylight brought no comfort. The twisted trees, the curling mist, and the faint, almost imperceptible movements of the figures created a suffocating sense of awareness. The forest itself felt alive, anticipating every step I took. I followed subtle cues, flattened leaves, footprints of impossible shapes, slight disturbances in moss, leading me to the central clearing. No tent or campsite remained, yet the mist pulsed faintly, a silent signal that the entity remembered my previous visits. The whispers were now clear, echoing in my mind. You belong here. Stay, forever. The pale humanoid figures appeared intermittently, moving with inhuman grace, observing without aggression. Their presence was psychological, testing limits, observing reactions, instilling fear without needing physical contact. It became obvious that the forest, the figures, and the howls formed a single entity of sentient manipulation. The howling woods weren't just haunted. They were alive, calculating, and infinitely patient. Weeks later, I learned that multiple hikers and rangers had experienced similar phenomena in the same area. Radios would emit static, GPS devices malfunctioned, and whispers were reported in the dead of night. The patterns were consistent: distorted howls, elongated footprints, and fleeting glimpses of faceless humanoid figures. I returned with a small team for a controlled investigation. During daylight, the forest appeared ordinary, yet an oppressive, sentient awareness pressed against us. As dusk fell, mist rose unnaturally, curling around roots and trunks, and the elongated figures began to glide between trees, observing silently. It didn't attack, but the presence was undeniable. Whispers invaded our minds. Stay, stay, stay forever. The forest manipulated perception, creating fear, disorientation, and anticipation simultaneously. Shadows bent, mist pulsed, and footprints appeared and disappeared as if the environment itself were alive. We retreated carefully, conscious of every movement, knowing that the figure's intelligence extended beyond physical interaction. Their patience was their weapon, their observation, a psychological trap. The forest itself seemed to breathe, measuring our fear, resilience, and decision-making. By the time we returned to the station, the experience had left an indelible mark. The howling woods weren't just dangerous. They were a sentient force, testing and observing anyone who dared enter alone after dark. Months later, I spoke to families of missing hikers who vanished near the howling woods. Each reported strange occurrences: whispers, glowing footprints, and fleeting glimpses of pale, faceless figures. None survived long enough to describe details, but the consistency of reports confirmed the forest's intelligence and intent. I returned to the clearing alone, leaving markers, notes, and camera equipment to document the phenomena. The forest appeared ordinary, calm even, yet I felt the presence pressing against my mind. Shadows shifted subtly, Mist pulsed, and the memory of the forest's sentient awareness lingered like a cold, invisible hand. It became clear that the figures and the howls were extensions of the forest itself, a sentient, patient, and calculating intelligence. They manipulated perception, guided movement, and instilled fear without physical interaction. Anyone alone in the howling woods after dark was a subject of observation, a psychological test designed to measure fear, patience, and resilience. Even leaving the clearing didn't remove the presence. The forest remembered, tracked, and subtly influenced all who entered. Yellowstone's howling woods were alive, aware, and endlessly patient. I continue my duties as a Yellowstone ranger. Yet the memory of the howling woods remains vivid. The elongated faceless figures, the whispers, the distorted howls. They never attacked, but they left an indelible impression. The forest itself had intelligence, patience, and awareness, manipulating perception and fear with precision. The howling woods are not merely haunted. They are alive. They study, observe, and test intruders, shaping the forest and its elements to control and manipulate perception. Survival is not about confrontation. It is about understanding, caution, and mental resilience. I patrol the backcountry with utmost care. Even in daylight, the awareness lingers. Every shadow, every whisper, every mist curl is a reminder that the forest is sentient and infinitely patient. The pale figures may not harm directly, but they observe, calculate, and test. And anyone alone after dusk may become the next subject of their silent scrutiny. If you ever hike alone in Yellowstone at night, remember this. The forest sees, it studies, and it never forgets. The howling woods are waiting, patient and relentless. And those who enter may find themselves trapped in its psychological labyrinth forever. My name is Ethan Cole, and I've been a Yellowstone Ranger for nearly 6 years. Most of my patrols involve routine check-ins and wildlife monitoring. But one summer evening changed everything. I was assigned to the Norris campground for an overnight patrol after reports of hikers hearing strange noises near the abandoned campsites. The campground was quiet as I arrived, the setting sun casting long shadows across empty picnic tables and fire pits. I checked the perimeter, noting the usual signs of wildlife: raccoon tracks, bird calls, and the distant roar of geysers. But there was an unusual chill in the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. As I approached a secluded area of the campground, I noticed faint footprints leading toward the trees. They were too small for adults, too precise to be random, and they glowed faintly under the dimming light. My flashlight beam caught something out of the corner of my eye. A fleeting silhouette. A child-sized figure standing perfectly still between two trees. I froze, my instincts screaming that this wasn't normal. The figure vanished before I could get a clear look, yet the air remained unnaturally cold. Whispers echoed faintly around me. Stay. Play with us. Forever. I realized then that these were not ordinary campers, nor wildlife. Something unnatural lingered in the abandoned sites, observing, waiting, and manipulating the environment with patience and intent. I followed the trail of faint, glowing footprints cautiously, flashlight cutting through the creeping darkness. Every branch, every rustle of leaves sounded amplified, and I felt eyes on me, invisible, yet undeniably present. The air seemed thicker here, heavier, as though the forest itself was aware of my every move. The silhouette appeared again, closer this time, just beyond the line of trees. It didn't move, didn't blink, but I could feel its awareness pressing on my mind. Whispers grew louder, faintly chanting, "Join us. Stay. Play." My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to remain calm. Panic would only make me more vulnerable. I noticed additional footprints, perfectly spaced, leading into the denser forest. Some were adult-sized, some child-sized, all glowing faintly, moving in patterns that made no logical sense. The forest seemed alive, guiding me, testing me, manipulating my perception. I understood then that these were phantom campers, entities, neither fully human nor animal, that lingered at the abandoned sites. They observed, they tested, and they thrived on fear. The forest around them was complicit, bending shadows, twisting paths, and intensifying the psychological pressure. Despite the fear clawing at me, duty forced me forward. I had to investigate further, to understand the nature of these entities and the haunting influence of the forest on unsuspecting visitors. I reached a small clearing where an abandoned campsite had once stood. Fire pits were cold, ashes undisturbed, yet the presence was palpable. The whispers became more distinct. "Play forever. Stay." Each word resonated inside my mind, layered with unnatural cadence. I noticed small figures darting between trees, humanoid but distorted, their faces obscured, limbs elongated unnaturally. They moved with fluid grace, gliding rather than walking, appearing and disappearing with the shifting mist. I couldn't tell how many there were, yet I could feel dozens observing silently. The forest itself seemed to react to their presence. Trees bent subtly, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and patches of mist curled like tendrils. The phantom campers weren't merely spectral apparitions. They were extensions of the forest's consciousness, manipulating space, sound, and perception to maximize psychological terror. I realized survival depended on patience and mental resilience. Any sudden movement or display of fear would provoke further observation, possibly deeper manipulation. I carefully documented the phenomenon with my flashlight and camera, trying to remain invisible while understanding their behavior. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet the forest seemed to guide me deeper, subtly, deliberately. Like a predator testing its prey, the whispers echoed faintly in my ears. "You belong here. Play. Forever." I ventured further, following a pattern of footprints that appeared to lead nowhere yet guided my steps. The forest was alive in ways I had never experienced. Branches twisted subtly, shadows stretched unnaturally, and the mist responded to my movements as if anticipating them. The phantom campers appeared intermittently, always at the edge of my vision, gliding between trees with silent precision. Their presence was intelligent, observing reactions, testing patience, and creating fear without any physical aggression. The whispers became insistent. "Stay, play, stay, forever." I felt them pressing into my mind, creating panic yet leaving my body unharmed. The forest itself amplified these psychological effects, bending perception, confusing spatial awareness, and manipulating light and sound. I understood the entities weren't seeking to harm physically. They relied on observation, patience, and psychological manipulation. Fear and anticipation were their weapons, and anyone alone in these woods after dark became the next subject of their game. Carefully, I retraced my steps, keeping awareness high and maintaining calm. Every shadow, every whisper, every subtle bend of the forest demanded my attention. One wrong move, and the forest's sentient influence could overwhelm even an experienced ranger. Finally, I reached the edge of the clearing, where the forest began to thin and the main ranger trail appeared faintly ahead. The whispers persisted, faint yet insistent. Stay, play, forever. The phantom campers lingered at the edge, gliding silently, faceless and elongated, watching me retreat. I realized the forest itself was complicit, shaping perception, guiding movement, and amplifying fear without direct aggression. The abandoned campers were extensions of the forest's sentient awareness, testing anyone who entered, studying reactions, and feeding off psychological tension. I continued along the trail, careful to avoid sudden movements, maintaining focus and calm despite the oppressive presence. The forest seemed to release its hold slowly, yet I could feel its intelligence tracking me, a silent reminder of the unseen watchers that thrived in the abandoned sites. Once back at the ranger station, I documented the experience thoroughly, aware that most would dismiss it. Yet I knew the truth. The phantom campers existed, not as spirits, but as extensions of Yellowstone's sentient, patient, and calculating wilderness. Even now, I avoid the Norris campground after dusk. The whispers, the figures, and the forest's subtle manipulations are a reminder of the unseen presence that waits patiently for the next intruder. That night, I returned with audio recorders and night vision cameras, determined to capture evidence of the phantom campers. The campground was unnervingly quiet, and the mist curled around fire pits and abandoned picnic tables as if alive. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, amplified by the oppressive silence. Soon, faint glowing footprints appeared, weaving through the campsite toward the tree line. I followed cautiously, flashlight and camera ready. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally, bending in ways that defied physics. The pale childlike figures emerged intermittently, gliding silently between trees, observing but never attacking. The whispers returned, clearer than ever. Stay, play, forever. Their voices were layered, seeming to originate both outside and inside my mind, creating a sense of omnipresence. The forest itself appeared to pulse in response, branches subtly bending and mist curling as if alive. I realized these entities were not spectral, but extensions of the forest's intelligence, manipulating sound, shadow, and perception to test, terrify, and study intruders. They thrived on patience, observation, and psychological control, making fear their weapon without ever needing physical confrontation. Carefully, I documented the footprints, mist patterns, and figure movements, noting how the forest seemed to react to my every decision. The phantom campers were patient, calculating, and infinitely observant, ensuring that any misstep could deepen the psychological grip of the woods. The howls of distant wildlife mixed unnaturally with whispers, forming a chorus that seemed orchestrated by the forest itself. Every step I took felt monitored, measured, as if the trees and mist were aware of my intentions. The childlike figures moved with unnatural precision, appearing at the periphery of my vision, then vanishing into the mist. I noticed the footprints multiplying, overlapping, creating patterns that led me deeper into the woods. The forest manipulated space and perception subtly, testing my focus and patience. One misstep could trigger panic, and the whispers seemed eager to exploit any sign of fear. Despite the growing terror, I pressed on, documenting every anomaly. The figures didn't attack, they simply observed, testing my endurance, my curiosity, and my resilience. Each sound, each shadow, each curl of mist became a psychological weapon, a way to shape my perception and amplify tension. By midnight, I realized the forest itself was sentient, and the phantom campers were extensions of its awareness. It was a psychological trap. The forest created fear, orchestrated observation, and shaped experience to ensnare anyone alone after dark. Even as I retreated to the edge of the campground, I could feel the presence lingering, watching, waiting for the next intruder to enter its labyrinth of shadows, whispers, and patient, intelligent observation. The following day, I returned with a small team of rangers to investigate the abandoned sites. Even in daylight, the forest's intelligence was apparent. Subtle distortions in the trees, bent branches, and curling mist indicated awareness. The phantom campers remained, partially visible, gliding among the trees, observing silently. As night fell, the forest seemed to pulse with sentience. Shadows elongated unnaturally, and whispers echoed faintly. Stay, play, forever. The figures appeared in unpredictable locations, testing perception and attention. Each movement felt calculated, a psychological trap designed to manipulate fear without ever needing physical harm. We followed the glowing footprints, noting how the forest guided our steps while simultaneously disorienting us. The figures didn't interact directly. Instead, they forced awareness, patience, and resilience. Their presence was a silent reminder that fear alone could control behavior, and that the forest itself was a living entity with intelligence and intent. Even when we left the area, the sensation of being observed persisted. The forest remembered, tracking movements, and the phantom campers acted as extensions of its sentient awareness, ensuring that the psychological impact remained long after departure. I understood fully that the Norris campground, abandoned sites, and surrounding forest were alive in ways no patrol manual could prepare anyone for, and that isolation after dark made anyone vulnerable to its patient, calculating influence. Months later, reports of hikers disappearing near the abandoned campground confirmed my suspicions. Each case had consistent signs: faint, glowing footprints, fleeting glimpses of faceless childlike figures, and whispered commands in the mind of those who survived temporarily. The forest was a patient observer, testing intruders and amplifying psychological pressure. I returned alone to leave permanent markers and record environmental data. Even in daylight, the presence was palpable. Subtle distortions in the trees, curling mist, and shifting shadows suggested awareness. The phantom campers lingered at the periphery, gliding silently, faceless and elongated, observing with calculated patience. The whispers echoed faintly in my mind. Stay, play, forever. I realized that these entities did not rely on physical aggression. The forest itself, through the phantom campers, manipulated perception, disoriented intruders, and instilled fear with precision. Survival depended on mental resilience, patience, and awareness of the forest's intelligence. Every step I took was measured, deliberate, and cautious. The forest's sentience was undeniable, and its ability to influence perception, sound, and shadow created a labyrinthine psychological trap. Those who ventured alone after dark were never truly safe. Even leaving the campground did not fully break the presence. The forest remembered, tracked, and observed. The phantom campers, extensions of its intelligence, were patient, unrelenting, and infinitely calculating. I continue my duties as a Yellowstone ranger. Yet the memory of the phantom campers remains vivid. The whispers, glowing footprints, and faceless figures are a reminder that the forest is alive, sentient, and infinitely patient. The Norris campground and surrounding backcountry are not merely haunted. They are a living, calculating entity, testing anyone who enters after dark. The phantom campers act as extensions of the forest's intelligence, observing silently, studying reactions, and manipulating perception to instill fear without direct aggression. Their presence demonstrates that the forest itself can be a psychological predator, using patience, observation, and subtle environmental manipulation as weapons. I patrol these areas with extreme caution. Even during daylight, I remain aware of shadows, whispers, and subtle distortions. The forest remembers, and the phantom campers continue to study every visitor. Isolation after dark is dangerous. The forest's sentience and its patient observers never forget. If you ever visit Yellowstone at night, remember this: the forest sees you, studies you, and waits. The abandoned campsites may appear empty, but the phantom campers and the forest's intelligence are always present. Intruders must respect its sentience, for fear, perception, and patience are its ultimate tools. The forest is patient. The forest is aware. And those who enter unprepared may never leave the same.